بسم الله الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على المبعوث رحمة للعالمين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه ومن اتبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. أما بعد, for we'll continue بإذن الله تعالى with our lessons and the chapter related to fasting, Kitab al-Siyam, from the book Daleel at-Taalib from Mar'i ibn Yusuf al-Karmi al-Hanbali rahimahullahu ta'ala. And in our previous lesson, we spoke about the subsection where the author rahimahullahu ta'ala spoke about the conditions of the obligation of fasting. And he mentioned that the shurutul wujub or shurut wujub al-sawm arba'atu ashya. And he mentioned that the conditions of the obligation, the condition of the fast being obligatory, are four. And he mentioned Islam, wal bulugh, wal aql, wal al-qudrah. And we spoke about the first three, or we spoke about the first four. And I mentioned that I would add two others that some of the Shaykh have mentioned, like Shaykh ibn Uthaymin rahimahullah ta'ala. And if you remember, the author rahimahullah ta'ala is going to talk about shurut al-wujub, and then he's going to talk about what are called shurut al-sihha. So we have two different types of conditions. Conditions that are conditions for the fast being obligatory, and we have conditions for the validity of the fast. The first one, the shurut, the conditions, or the first set, they are conditions of obligation, meaning that if these conditions are found in an individual, then the fast is obligatory upon him. And shurut al-sihha, they mean that, or this means that they are conditions for the fast to be valid, because a fast could be valid but not be obligatory, like on the in the situation of a child who's not at the age of puberty, but he is past the age of what the ulama call tamyiz, which we'll get into. Here, the conditions of obligations have not been met. It's not obligatory upon him, yet the conditions of sihha or validity have been met, so his fast would be valid. After the author, rahimahullah ta'ala, mentioned the four conditions of obligations, or the four conditions which must be met for the fast to be obligatory upon an individual. And we mentioned the definition of shart and what that means. So no need to repeat it. With regards to al-bulugh wal-aql, in the books of fiqh, you find that this is called taklif. Sometimes they refer to it as al-mukallaf. The person who will be held accountable for those things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded and those things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has prohibited. The person will be held accountable for those things. This is called al-mukallaf, and the ulama mentioned that al-mukallaf huwa al-baligh al-aql. The mukallaf, the person who will be questioned and taken to task for the obligations that Allah made obligatory and the prohibitions. The ulama mentioned that this is called mukallaf, and it is a baligh or aql, the person who has reached the age of puberty, and the person who has aql, he has his normal mental faculties. So the scholar rahimahullah ta'ala, the author rahimahullah ta'ala, he mentioned al-Islam wal-aql wal-bulugh wal-qudratu alayh, meaning that the individual is a Muslim. Islam is a condition for the obligation of fasting. The person must have his normal mental faculties. The person has reached the age of puberty. And al-qudratu alayh, meaning that the person is physically able to fast. And we said that adam al-qudra, and I mentioned the statement of Shaykh ibn Uthaymin in the last lesson, that the person who is not physically able, that situation of not being physically able is either going to be temporary, and that person has a hukum specific to him that the author rahimahullah ta'ala will speak about later, and that is the statement of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, فَمَنْ كَانَ مِنْكُمْ مَرِيضًا أَوْ عَلَى سَفَرٍ فَعِدَّةٌ مِّنْ أَيَّامٍ أُخَرٍ. So the person who is marid, yani this is temporary. So the person is not able, and that inability is temporary. He makes up those days. And then you have the ajiz, or the person not being able for the long term. For example, a person has a chronic illness, or he has an illness that in all likelihood he's not going to recover from, and he's not going to get better. It's a permanent or a chronic condition that the person is unable to fast due to physically not being able to fast, or having to take certain types of medication, or the fast having adverse reactions, or causing adverse reactions to his body. So this person has a specific hukum, and that is feeding a poor person for each day that he does not fast, which the author is going to speak about in the next point. However, before we get to that point, in addition to these 4 conditions, some ulama mention, like Shaykh ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala, he mentions that there are 2 more conditions: that the person must be muqiman, that the person must be a resident. And this is, of course, a condition for the person, the fast being obligatory, ada'an, meaning that it being an obligation for, or this is a condition for the obligation of fasting in the actual month of Ramadan. Of course, the fasting person, he's not obligated to fast in Ramadan. However, he's obligated to make up the fast outside of Ramadan. So some ulama, like Shaykh ibn Taymiyyah, mentioned that as being a condition, under the understanding that it is a condition of fasting in the actual month of Ramadan. So that would be the 5th one, that the person is a muqiman. He's not a traveler, he's a resident. And al-khulu min al-mawani'. And the author is going to speak about that. The person, or the another condition, is the absence of anything preventing the fast from being either valid or obligatory, and that is with regards to the woman who is experiencing her monthly cycle, or the woman who is experiencing postnatal bleeding. And of course, the woman who is on her monthly cycle, she makes up her fast, and the author is going to speak about that. She makes up her fast outside of Ramadan. So it's not an obligation that if she has her monthly cycle during the month of Ramadan, of course, it's not valid for her. Even if she was to fast, it wouldn't be accepted. It's not valid for her to fast while she's on her period. And likewise, the woman who recently gave birth and experiencing postnatal bleeding, likewise, if she was to fast, it wouldn't be considered valid. And it's not obligatory upon her to fast during the actual month of Ramadan. Rather, she's going to fast, she's going to make those days up outside of Ramadan. Then the author, rahimahullah ta'ala, and we'll speak about that and the Daleel for that when the author mentions that point. Then the author, rahimahullah ta'ala, he states, فَمَنْ عَجَزَ عَنْهُ. So the person who is not able to fast, لِكِبَرٍ أَوْ مَرَدٍ لَا يُرْجَى زَوَالُهُ. So if the person is not able to fast due to old age, he's or she is so old that they can't physically handle the fast, or the person who is sick, and the person has a sickness or a situation where, a medical situation that in all likelihood he's not going to get better from, so it's a chronic sickness or a chronic disease or a chronic ailment that prevents the person from fasting. أو مرض لا يرجى زواله. What's the hukum? After mentioning these two categories of people, the author, rahimahullah ta'ala, mentions the hukum. What is obligatory upon this individual who's in this situation? He says, أفطر وأطعم عن كل يوم مسكينا مد بر أو نصف صاع من غيره. Then the author mentions that what is obligatory upon this person is that he doesn't fast due to the person's old age. And of course, when we say old age, it means the person is so old that physically he's not able or she's not able to fast, but they still have their mental faculties. If the person is senile and has lost his mental faculties due to his old age, of course, he has not met the condition of the fast being obligatory upon him. So the person has his mental faculties, but he's so old, or the woman is so old that they physically can't fast, or the person has a sickness that in all likelihood he's not going to recover from, or she's not going to recover from, a chronic ailment, chronic sickness that doesn't allow the person to fast or will cause harm if the person fasts. What's the ruling? The ruling is that these people can break their fast, or they break their fast and they feed a poor person for each day that they don't fast in. And then the author, rahimahullah ta'ala, he mentioned what is the amount. And يعني the ulama, the fuqaha, specifically the Hanabila, they say مد بر, يعني a mud is a measure. It was a measure by size that was used during the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's not a weighted measure, rather it's an actual size or measure. And the ulama mentioned that it was essentially the equivalent of, like this, a person's yani hafna, the average person who has average size hands, yani a handful, two handfuls like this, yani that was considered a mud. And 4 of those are the equivalent of a sa'. And there are vessels that have, yani basically, that are of this measure, and they are equivalent to what was used during the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Ulama of today, several of the ulama today say because most people don't have access or they don't use those measures today, the ulama calculated or converted to what we use today in kilos, and they say that يعني the close equivalent, and again it's an approximation, is 1.5 kilos, and that is the opinion of Shaykh Fawzan hafidhahullah ta'ala and other scholars. And again, it's an approximation, so if a person adds a little bit to that just to ensure that يعني the amount that he gives is enough. And the ulama say that يعني with regards to feeding the poor person, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says فِدْيَةٌ مِّن طَعَامٍ مِسْكِينٍ. نعم. So here وَعَلَى الَّذِينَ يُطِيقُونَهُ فِدْيَةٌ طَعَامٌ مِسْكِينٍ. So here, in terms of feeding a poor person, the ulama mentioned that it can be done in 2 ways. A person can actually prepare food, and it is normally similar to what the person himself eats or what is customary for that particular land or region that he's in, what's considered a meal. And Shaykh Ibn Uthaymin mentions this, and he mentions the action of Anas ibn Malik, that when he got old, when he became elderly, what he would do was he would gather 30 people and he would feed them bread and like a gravy, the equivalent of a meal. And the second way is that the person can do what is called tamlik, they actually give them the foodstuffs to prepare themselves. And the ulama mentioned that could be the staple food of that particular region. So it could be rice or wheat or barley, things that people use pretty much in every meal. And if the person was to do so, then it would be the equivalent of نصف الساعة, 2 muds, or half of a sa'a. And what the author mentioned when he said with regards to mud burrin, a mud, the equivalent, this measure of a mud, if it was bur, whole wheat, أو نصف صاع, which is considered 2 مدين, or 2 measures, yani basically double the size if it's from anything else. And that's because there are ulama who mention that burr was considered superior, or whole wheat was considered superior to other than it. So therefore, if that's given, it's given only 1 mud. And if it was something else, it was considered less than the whole wheat. So it was given a nis sa'a, or this measure of 2 muddain, 2 muds, as it was considered inferior to whole wheat. And again, ulama like Shaykh ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala, they mention that what should be given is what's customary in the land, or what's considered a meal. And the proof of that is the action of Anas ibn Malik, that he would give this bread and gravy to 30 people. And it can be done on a daily basis or at the end of the month. And there are ulama like Shaykh ibn Baz rahimahullah ta'ala who state that it can be done, for example, in the beginning of the month, the middle of the month, or at the end of the month. And likewise, you have the ulama who state that it should be done after the person actually misses that day, or the person doesn't fast on that day. So let's say, for example, the first day of Ramadan, he doesn't fast. So then it becomes obligatory upon him to feed a poor person. So he does it after the days that he didn't fast in. And then the author, rahimahullah ta'ala, he mentions وَشُرُوطُ صِحَّتِهِ سِتَّةٌ. Now the author, rahimahullah ta'ala, is talking about the conditions of the validity of the fast, meaning that these conditions must be met in order for the fast to be considered valid. So if one of these conditions is not met, then the person's fast is not considered valid. And the first one is al-Islam. And this is a condition for all forms of ibadah. And we mentioned that some of these, if you remember, you will see that some of these conditions overlap. They are conditions of wujub, conditions of obligation, or conditions which must be met in order for the fast to be obligatory. Likewise, they are conditions for the fast to be valid. And we mentioned the Daleel for that. ما منعهم أن تقبل منهم نفقاتهم إلا أنهم كفروا بالله ورسوله. And nothing prevented their nafaqat, or their spending, and this is in relation to the mushrikeen, nothing prevented their nafaqat, or their spending, to be accepted, except that they disbelieved in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger. So the person must be a Muslim, and of course, if a person is not a Muslim, his actions are not accepted from him. وَمَنْ يَكْفُرْ بِالْإِيمَانِ فَقَدْ حَبِطَ عَمَلُهُ. The ayah, وَلَئِنْ أَشْرَكْتَ لَيَحْبَطَنَّ عَمَلُكَ وَلَتَكُونَنَّ مِنَ الْخَاسِرِينَ. So here, and then the next point, the author mentions وَانْقِطَاعُ دَمِ الْحَيْضِ. And this is related to the condition that Shaykh ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala mentioned, that the woman, with regards to the woman, when nifas, the woman's period, must have stopped, meaning that she's not experiencing her monthly cycle, nor is she experiencing postnatal bleeding, or postpartum bleeding, the bleeding that happens after the woman gives birth. And the proof of that is the hadith of Aisha radiallahu anha, which is muttafiqun alayh, narrated by al-Bukhari and Muslim, when the woman, al-Adawiyya, she asked Aisha radiallahu anha, ma bal al-ha'id, what's the condition, or why is it that the woman who experiences her monthly cycle, taqdi as-sawm wa la taqdi as-salat, that she makes up the fast but she doesn't make up the prayer. And then Aisha radiallahu anha asked her, haruriyatun anti, are you from the haruriyya, from the khawarij? So here the proof is that she asked, how is it that, or why is it that the fast, the woman who experiences her monthly cycle, why is it that she makes up the fast but she doesn't make up the prayer? So here is proof that the woman who is on her monthly cycle, she doesn't fast. And even if she did, it wouldn't be accepted from her. Rather, she makes it up. And likewise, you have the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, wherein he mentioned, Alaysa idha hadat, isn't it the case that if the woman starts her period or starts her monthly cycle, lam tusalli wa lam tasum, she doesn't pray, nor does she fast. So this is proof that the woman must not be on her monthly cycle or experiencing this postpartum bleeding in order for the fast to be accepted from her, or in order for the fast to be valid, to be valid. And that was the third one. So both of those are considered conditions. So you have Islam, then the fact that she doesn't, or she's not experiencing her monthly cycle. That was the second one. And the third one, that she's not experiencing postpartum bleeding. And the fourth one is tamyiz. Tamyiz, this could be translated as discretion. The ulama give the definition. Some ulama specify it with a specific age. And they say that the child must reach the age of 7. However, the strongest opinion is that it's not tied to a specific age. Rather, it's tied to the ability of the child to yafham al-khitab. He understands when he's being addressed. وَيُحْسِنْ al-jawab. And that he understands when he's being spoken to, and he responds with that which is suitable for the situation that he's in. So he has discretion. He's able to understand certain things. He's not at the age of puberty, but he's able to understand certain things, and he has this discretion, and it's called tamyiz. Here, the child, if he fasts, it's not obligatory upon him, because we mentioned that from the conditions of the fast being obligatory is that the person must have reached the age of puberty. But if the child has reached the age of tamyiz, and he's able to understand what it means to fast, what nullifies the fast, and he's able to understand that and make the intention, then if he fasts, his fast is valid. So tamyiz is a condition for the fast to be valid, which means that if the child is too young to understand what it means to have the intention, or to understand what it means to break the fast, then his fast is not valid. For example, 3 years old, 4 years old, like this, then his fast is not valid. And then the author, rahimahullah ta'ala, he mentions that فَيَجِبُ عَلَى وَلِيِّ الْمُمَيِّزِ. And then the author mentions, and it is obligatory upon the parent or the guardian of the child who is at this age of discretion, al-mumayyiz, al-mutiq, and the person, this child, actually physically can handle fasting. المطيق للصوم أمره به وضربه عليه ليعتاده. The author mentions that it is obligatory upon the parent or the custodian or the guardian of this child who has this discretion and is able to understand what it means to fast, and he's physically able to fast. It's obligatory upon the parent or the guardian or the custodian to command the child to fast, and to reprimand him or beat him or hit him if he doesn't, so as to train this child or to get the child to become accustomed to fasting. There are ulama who say that it is not obligatory. Rather, the obligation is related to salat, related to the prayer, as that has specific proof. And that proof is the Prophet ﷺ said, Muru awladakum bis salat wa hum sab'a. Command your children to pray at the age of 7. وهم أبناء 7 سنين أو هم أبناء 7. وَاضْرِبُوهُمْ عَلَيْهِ وَهُمْ أَبْنَاءَ 10. And punish them or hit them if they don't pray at the age of 10. The author, rahimahullah ta'ala, and other scholars who are of the same opinion, they made qiyas, or an analogy. They equated the prayer, or they equated fasting to the prayer. The specific daleel or specific proof is related to the prayer, and they said likewise this applies to fasting. And there are other ulama who state that it is mustahab, meaning that it is recommended for the parent or the guardian or the custodian to command this child who's at the age of discretion to fast. And there is an example of that from the Sahaba, that they would command their children, or they would yusawwimun awladum, they would cause they would have their children fast, and they would make they would give them like cotton or cotton toys min al-ihn, so as to busy them and play them. They would give them toys made from this like cotton, so that they can play with it and busy themselves with playing, as opposed to thinking about being hungry. And in other books of the Hanabila, for example, you have a book entitled at-Tasheel, and also in Umdat al-Fiqh as well. The authors of those books mention وَيُؤْمَرْ, they say that the child al-mumayyiz, that the child that is at this discretion, is commanded to fast if he's able. إِذَا أَطَاقَهُ, if he's able to physically fast and handle the fast, meaning that he's not too young that it would harm him, or that he's not physically able. So here they mention that he is commanded to do so, without them specifically saying that it was an obligation upon the parents. Shaykh Fawzan, hafidhahullah ta'ala, he mentions that the same wording of the author. He says, يجب على ولي الصبي المميز الذي بلغ 7 سنين أمر الطفل بالصيام. Shaykh Fawzan, hafidhahullah ta'ala, in his explanation, he mentions that basically he supports the opinion of the author, rahimahullah ta'ala, that it is an obligation upon the parent or the guardian. And then he mentions the reason why, لِيَتَدَرَّبَ عَلَيْهِ, so that he becomes accustomed and trains himself to doing so. لِأَجْلِ وَلِأَجْلِ أَن تَكُونَ نَافِلَةً, and that with regards to this child, it's not an obligation, it's not considered an obligatory fast, but it gets the reward of doing a nafila, supererogatory fast. And then Shaykh Fawzan, hafidhahullah ta'ala, mentions the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam as it pertains to the prayer. And he stated after mentioning that hadith, he says, كَذَلِكَ الصِّيَامِ, likewise with regards to fasting, يُؤْمَرْ بِهِ, it is commanded, this child is commanded to do so, إِذَا كَانَ يُطِيقُهُ, if he's physically able to do it and carry it out, وَيَكُونُ لَهُ نَافِلَةً, and it is considered a supererogatory action for this child, وَيَكُونُ تَدَرُّبًا عَلَى الصِّيَامِ, and it is practice for him, or getting him acquainted to fast. And then the author, rahimahullah ta'ala, mentions the 5th condition for the validity of the fast, and that is al-aql, that he has his normal mental faculties. As we mentioned earlier, that this is also a condition for obligation. Likewise, it is a condition for the fast to be considered valid, as the person who doesn't have his normal mental faculties, he doesn't have his intellect, then there is no intention. This person cannot formulate an intention. It's not obligatory upon him, and even if he was to fast, it wouldn't be valid or accepted from him. And Shaykh Fawzan, hafidhahullah ta'ala, mentions that. He says, فَهَذَا لَا يَجِبُ عَلَيْهِ أَيْ عِبَادَةٍ, no form of worship is obligatory upon the person, or even valid from the person who doesn't have his normal intellectual or mental faculties. لَا سِيَامَ وَلَا غَيْرِ, no form of worship, whether that be fasting or any other form of worship, حتى يرجع إليه عقله, until that person has his normal mental faculties. And then the author mentions an issue related to if this situation of junun, or this situation of not having his normal mental faculties or losing his intellect, but it's temporary, or if the person loses consciousness and it's temporary, what's the ruling? And there are two scenarios. I'll read the statement of the author and then we'll explain that بإذن ta'ala. He states, لكن لو نوى ليلا ثم جن أو أغمي عليه جميع النهار فأفاق منه قليلا صح. The author mentions, if the person makes the intention before Fajr, he has his normal mental faculties, he's conscious. He makes his intention before Fajr. Then that person loses consciousness, or he loses his intellect, he loses his mind, but it's temporary. The ulama mentioned that if this situation of losing consciousness, or losing his intellect, or losing his mind extends from the time of Fajr until the time of Maghrib, meaning that the entire time he's supposed to fast, if he's in the situation of not being conscious or in the situation of not having his normal intellectual faculties or not having his intellect or not having his mind or losing his mind, if that is the situation and that situation extends from the entire time he is to fast, then this person is, he doesn't have to, it's not considered him fasting. Even though he made his intention before Fajr, it's not considered him fasting. It's not valid from this individual. And the ulama say that with a person who lost his mind or his intellect, he's غير مكلف. He's not responsible anyway, because the condition of the fast being obligatory is one having his normal intellectual faculties or having his mind. So if he loses it throughout the entire day, then that person, the fast is not accepted from him, and he doesn't have to make it up. However, with regards to the person who loses consciousness, he loses consciousness throughout the entire day, meaning that no portion of the day did he have his consciousness, meaning that from the time of Fajr, or right before Fajr, until Maghrib time, this person was unconscious. Then the ulama mentioned, and there is a difference of opinion with this, but the ulama mentioned that the Jumhur ulama are of the opinion that he makes the fast up. That was the first scenario. So the person has lost consciousness or lost his mind throughout the entire time he's supposed to fast, from the time of Fajr until Maghrib time. So no portion of the day did this person have his intellect, nor was he conscious. Or, he wasn't conscious. Two scenarios. If this is the situation, that was the first situation that we mentioned. However, if he gains consciousness, even if it's the last portion of the day, or his intellect or his mind comes back some portion of the day, then this is what the author mentioned, sah. His fast is considered valid. Why? Because he made his intention before Fajr, and he actually fasted a portion of the day, and he had his mental faculties, or he was conscious during that small portion. So here it's true that he fasted part of the day. And that's what the author was referring to. And that's what he said, لكن إذا نوى ليلا, he made his intention at night, ثم جن, then he lost his intellect, or أغمي عليه, or he was unconscious, جميع النهار فأفاق منه قليلا, the entire day, except for a small portion, during a small portion of the day, he had his intellect, or he was conscious, then the fast is considered valid. And another statement from the book entitled Zad al-Mustaqni', his ibara, his actual sentence is clearer. And he mentions, وَمَنْ نَوَى الصَّوْمَ, whoever intended to fast, made the intention to fast the next day. ثُمَّ جُنْ أو أُغْمِيَ عَلَيْهِ, then the person loses his intellect, or he loses consciousness. جَمِيعَ النَّهَارِ, the entire day. وَلَمْ يُفِقْ جُزْءًا مِنْهُ, and he didn't or he wasn't awake, he didn't have his consciousness, or he didn't have his mind in any portion of the day, لم يصح صومه. And that was the first scenario that we mentioned. Then his fast is not valid. However, if the person makes the intention before Fajr and they're in the situation of losing their intellect, or losing their mind, or not being conscious throughout the day, but a small portion of the day, whether that small portion of the day be in the beginning, middle, or end, if it is true that this person had his consciousness or had his normal mental faculties throughout any portion of the day, then his fast will be valid. Inshallah, that point is clear. And then the author, rahimahullah ta'ala, he mentions as-sadis, and this is the sixth condition for the fast to be valid. He says, an-niyatu min al-layl likulli yawmin wajib. An-niyatu min al-layl likulli yawmin wajib. So we have two issues here. The issue of when the intention to fast is made, and is it made for every day? The ulama mentioned, the Hanabila, and this is the opinion of the author, they looked at each individual day of Ramadan as being an independent form of worship. So Ramadan is either going to be 29 or 30 days. So each day is an independent day of worship. Day one is an independent day of worship. This is an ibadah mustaqillah, an independent worship. The second day, the third day, like this. So they said, or they were of the opinion, that due to this fact, it is obligatory to make the intention to fast for every day, yani before every day. So for example, before the first day, you make the intention to fast the first day of Ramadan. Before the second day, you make the intention before Fajr to fast the second day of Ramadan. The third day, you make the intention before Fajr to fast the third day of Ramadan. So each day, you make the intention to fast the next day. And it is a condition that you make the intention for each respective day. And then the author mentions, فَمَنْ خَطَرَ بِقَلْبِهِ لَيْلًا أَنَّهُ صَائِمٌ فَقَدْ نَوَى وَكَذَلِكَ الْأَكْلُ وَالشُّرْبُ بِنِيَّةِ الصَّوْمِ. And then he mentions what constitutes a niyyah. What constitutes the intention? Is it something that the person must say? No. Rather, if it crosses the person's mind or heart during the night, yani before Fajr, that he's going to fast, then this person has made the intention. Likewise, if he ate or drank with the intention of fasting, of course, if the person has suhoor meal, yani normally throughout the normal days of the year, the person doesn't have suhoor. When do they have suhoor? When they're going to fast. So just having the suhoor meal is an intention. Shaykh al-Islam, rahimahullah ta'ala, he mentions that the way the person changes his dinner, and when he eats his dinner, yani that this in itself is the intention, because the person has done so because he has the intention to fast the next day. So here the author mentions how that intention is formulated. For example, if you eat certain things or eat at a certain time or do certain things during the nights of Ramadan because you plan to fast the next day, that in and of itself is an intention to fast the next day. Back to the point of making the intention for each respective day. We mentioned the statement of the author, rahimahullah ta'ala, and he was of the intention that, or he was of the position that each day is an independent form of worship, so the person must make the intention each day. Shaykh Abdullah Bassam, rahimahullah ta'ala, and Shaykh Abdullah Bassam was the student of Shaykh Abdul Rahman ibn Sa'di, and he was from the Kibar ulama. He mentioned that اختلف العلماء هل يكفي الصوم أو هل يكفي للصوم شهر رمضان. He mentioned that the ulama differ. Does it suffice during the month of Ramadan نية واحدة في أوله أم لابد لكل لكل يوم صوم نية مستقلة. He mentioned that the ulama differ with regards to the intention of fasting during Ramadan. Is one intention at the beginning of the month sufficient for the entire month? Or must there be the intention to fast each respective day, as each respective day is an independent form of worship? ذهب المالكية, the Malikis, يعني مذهب المالكي, they were of the position that if the person إلى أنه يجزي صوم شهر رمضان بنية واحدة, that if the person makes the intention at the beginning of the month, يعني before Ramadan starts, he has the intention to fast the entire month of Ramadan, and that's what the majority of people have. يعني people make the intention to fast Ramadan. They don't make the intention to fast the first 5 days and not fast the rest of the month, or fast for the first 3 days. They make the intention to fast the entire month. He mentions that يعني the Malikis were of the opinion that it suffices to have this intention from the beginning of the month, يعني meaning that the person has the intention to fast the entire month at the beginning of the month, and this is sufficient. تكون في أول الشهر, the beginning of the month, وكذا في الصيام متتابع, وهو رواية عن الإمام أحمد اختاره جماعة من أصحابه, واستدلوا على ذلك بحديث إنما الأعمال بالنيات, وهذا قد نوى جميع الشهر, ورمضان بمنزلة عبادة واحدة. He mentions that the Malikis were of the opinion that this intention at the beginning of the month to fast the entire month suffices. And likewise, any other month or any other fast that requires the person to fast successive days or days consecutively, like the person like kafara. And this is a riwayah or a narration from Imam Ahmad, and many of the ashab or many of the scholars of the Hanbali madhab and followers of Imam Ahmad chose this position, and they use as proof the hadith إنما الأعمال بالنيات, verily actions are by their intentions, and this person has intended to fast the entire month. So they looked at the fast of Ramadan as being the entire month, as opposed to being individual forms of ibadah each day. And Shaykh ibn Uthaymin rahimahullah ta'ala was of this opinion as well. And he mentioned that the opinion of the author, يعني with regards to Zad, who was of the same madhab, يعني same statement as يعني what we just read. He mentioned that the Hanbali madhab is what we mentioned, that each individual day is an independent form of worship, so the person makes the intention before each successive day. He stated that وَعَلَّلُوا بأن كل يوم عبادة مستقلة. The reason why they were of this opinion is they looked at each individual day as being an independent form of worship. وذهب بعض أهل العلم, however, some scholars, they were of the opinion إلى أن ما يشترط فيه التتابع. Other scholars looked at at-Taalib, meaning that the Ramadan is consecutive or successive days that basically add up to the entire month. And due to this fact, يكفي نية واحدة, that one intention at the beginning of the month suffices, provided that the person doesn't stop fasting due to traveling or sickness or anything else. If he does so, then he renews that intention to fast the remainder of the month. And then the Shaykh ibn Uthaymin mentions وَهَذَا هُوَ أَصَحْ, and this is the strongest opinion. فإذا لم تقع النية في كل ليلة حقيقة فهي واقعة حكما. Even if the person makes the intention at the beginning of the month, this suffices, as in reality, يعني the person has made the intention to fast the entire month, even if he doesn't make the intention before each individual day. Why? Because the person has made the intention to fast the entire month, and this suffices. And then he states, وَهَذَا الْقَوْلُ هُوَ الَّذِي تَطْمَئِنُّ إِلَيْهِ النَّفْسِ, and this is the position that the soul or the self is at ease with. وَلَا يَسَعُ النَّاسَ الْعَمَلُ إِلَّا عَلَيْهِ, and he said that this is what suffices the people, or what is what the people do. What's easiest on the people to do. وهذا هو القول المالكية, and he again attributes this to the opinion of the Malikis, meaning that the person has the intention to fast all of Ramadan, and that this suffices at the beginning of the month, that he makes the intention to fast the entire month, provided he doesn't do anything that cuts that consecutiveness or stop fasting. For example, traveling, or for example, the woman who experiences her monthly cycle. So anything that cuts that or stops that successiveness, then the person renews his intention. And again, if a person has suhoor, or he changes his daily eating habits and he eats dinner later, all of that is formulating an opinion. So the reality is that the person, he's going to have the opinion during the night before Fajr time for each individual day based on the actions that he does at night. And again, we explain that just to understand the statements of the ulama and understand their rationale or their proofs for their respective positions. And then the author rahimahullah ta'ala mentions وَلَا يَضُرُّ إِنْ أَتَى بَعْدَ النِّيَّةِ. There was one more point with regards to the proof for making the intention before Fajr. The ulama uses proof for making the intention before Fajr, the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, "Man lam yujmi' as-siyam qabla al-fajr, fala siyamu lah." The person who doesn't make the intention before Fajr, then this person, there's no siyam for this individual. And there are other narrations with similar wording. "Man lam yubayyit as-siyam qabla al-fajr, fala siyama lah." So here, this is proof that the person, this is proof for the scholars who say that the intention is made before the actual date. So the person makes the intention before Fajr. And again, we mentioned the opinion that if the person makes that in the beginning of the month, he makes it the night before Ramadan starts to fast the entire month, that there are those from the scholars who say that this is sufficient. Meaning that the person doesn't wake up in the day and say, okay, I found out it's Ramadan, I'm going to fast. The person must have the intention beforehand. And then he states, after making that intention, وَلَا يُضُرُّ إِنْ أَتَى بَعْدَ النِّيَّةِ بِمُنَافٍ لِلصَّوْمِ. Meaning that, and it doesn't harm the individual, that after making that intention, let's say, for example, he has his suhoor meal. Let's say he has his suhoor meal, but there's still time before Fajr. If the person does something after making that intention to fast the next day, for example, he drinks or he eats after making the intention, or has relations with his wife after making the intention, this doesn't nullify his intention. He doesn't have to renew his intention. And it doesn't nullify his fast. أو قال إن شاء الله غير مترددا أو مترددا. وكذلك لو قال ليلة 30 من رمضان إن كان غدا من رمضان ففرضي وإلا فمفطر، ويضر إن قاله في أوله، وفرضه الإمساك عن المفطرات من طلوع الفجر الثاني إلى غروب الشمس. Then he states that likewise it doesn't harm the individual if he says, for example, he makes the intention, or he says that he's going to fast and he says inshallah, provided that his statement of inshallah is not a statement of him doubting. It doesn't, he's not doubting, mutaraddid, maybe I will fast, maybe I won't. Rather, the person says inshallah tabarrukan, and Shaykh Fawzan mentions that in qasada at-tabarruk bi inshallah, then there's no issue. The person says inshallah for the purposes of inshallah, or to acknowledge that tahqiqan, that this is not going to take place, that I'm not going to fast unless Allah Azza wa Jal wills that or deems that. Then there's no issue in him saying inshallah. وَكَذَا لَوْ قَالَ, likewise, if the person says on the 30th night of Ramadan, and of course, as we mentioned previously, that the night precedes the day in the lunar calendar. So let's say, for example, the 30th night, he still doesn't know, and of course, the 30th night means that the next day could be Shawwal, it could be Eid, or it could be the 30th day of Ramadan. So the person goes, let's say, for example, he goes to bed right after Maghrib, and he doesn't know if tomorrow is going to be the last day of Ramadan or the day of Eid. So he says, if it's Ramadan, then basically I'll fast. He said he makes the intention. Let's say he eats before he goes to bed or what have you, and he says to himself, he has the intention to fast the next day. If that day is Ramadan, then there's no issue. Why? Because the person, the asl, the general principle is that Ramadan will remain Ramadan unless there is proof that the month has ended. And as that person went to sleep, it was still Ramadan. وَالْأَصْلُ بَقِيَ مَا كَانَ عَلَى مَا كَانَ. What we know is Ramadan was in. We're in the month of Ramadan. That asl stays unless we have proof otherwise. So if the person says, if tomorrow is Ramadan, then I'm fasting, there's no issue because the asl is that Ramadan remains. And then the author mentions, وَفَرْضُهُ الْإِمْسَاكِ عَنِ الْمُفْتِرَاتِ, and what is obligatory or what is considered, and the ulama mentioned that here, sometimes the word fard and rukn are interchangeable. What is obligatory upon the person, in addition to making the intention, al-imsak, that the person refrains from, al-muftirat, those things that nullify the fast. And we said that the asl for that is drinking or eating or sexual relations, lawful sexual relations. Min tulu' al-fajr, from the time Fajr comes in, true Fajr, al-Fajr al-Thani, and that's al-Fajr al-Sadiq, the true Fajr, ila ghurub al-Shams, until Maghrib time comes in. And Shaykh Fawzan mentions that the person has this niyyah, that fasting is this niyyah, the intention of doing it as a form of worship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with this imsak, refraining from those things that he's not to partake in, whether it be eating, drinking, or sexual intercourse during those stated times. And that goes back to the definition we mentioned with regards to as-siyam shar'an, the sharia definition of siyam, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states, وَكُلُوا وَاشْرَبُوا حَتَّى يَتَبَيَّنَ لَكُمْ الخيط الفجر من الخيط الأبيض من الخيط الأسود من الفجر. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions ثُمَّ أَتِمُّ الصِّيَامِ إِلَى اللَّيْلِ. So here, these are the proofs for the respective times where the individual fast therein. And then the author mentions, and we'll stop here for tonight's lesson, وَالسُّنَنُهُ سِتَّةٌ. The author, the next section, the author is going to mention the sunan actions of fasting, and what constitutes actions that are in agreement with the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam while the person is fasting. And then the next subsection, the author mentions those people who are excused from fasting in detail, with regards to the traveler, with regards to the person who is sick, with regards to the breastfeeding woman or the nursing woman, the breastfeeding woman or the pregnant woman, and also with regards to the person who meets the conditions of obligations in the middle of the day, what's obligatory upon him, and likewise what is specific to al-kafara, what is specific to the person who has sexual intercourse during the day of Ramadan, what is obligatory upon him. And then he mentions specifically what the kafara is, and then what happens to the person who misses Ramadan. So inshallah, if we have 2 more classes, we'll have class bi'idhnillahi ta'ala on Monday and Tuesday of next week. And then inshallah, we should finish Kitab al-Siyam, or at least up until the point of everything that is related to the obligatory fast of Ramadan. Well, and that concludes tonight's lesson. Wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.